The October evening air in Oakland, California, carried the scent of eucalyptus and the distant salt tang from San Francisco Bay as 60-year-old Jerome Washington adjusted his tie for the third time in the mirror of his Rockridge home. The reflection staring back showed a distinguished man whose mahogany skin carried the earned lines of 6 decades, some from laughter, others from the weight of responsibilities that had shaped his life since he was barely old enough to vote. Jerome's house, a beautifully restored Victorian that he'd purchased in the early 2000s when the neighborhood was still affordable for a successful electrician, stood as testament to 35 years of hard work and careful financial planning. The warm yellow exterior with white trim housed memories of raising his son Marcus as a single father, of birthday parties in the backyard, of homework sessions at the kitchen table, and of dreams for a family legacy that seemed increasingly fragile with each passing year. Tonight was Jerome's 60th birthday, and despite the milestone's significance, he felt more apprehension than celebration as he prepared for the dinner Marcus had insisted on hosting. Their relationship had grown increasingly strained over the past 2 years, ever since Jerome had refused to co-sign a loan for Marcus's third failed business venture, a boutique sneaker store in downtown Oakland that had collapsed within 8 months due to poor planning, and Marcus's tendency to prioritize appearance over substance. The friction between father and son had deeper roots than financial disagreements, though those certainly didn't help. Marcus, now 32, had grown up with advantages Jerome never had: private school education, college tuition fully paid, a car for his 16th birthday, and the kind of financial security that came from having a father who worked 2 jobs to ensure his son wouldn't face the same struggles that had defined Jerome's own youth in East Oakland during the crack epidemic of the 1980s. But those advantages seemed to have bred entitlement rather than gratitude. Marcus had developed expensive tastes and a lifestyle that his sporadic income as a freelance graphic designer couldn't support. He lived in a trendy loft in downtown Oakland, drove a BMW he could barely afford, and constantly spoke about building his brand and investing in his image, while accumulating credit card debt and asking his father for money with increasing frequency and decreasing humility. Jerome walked through his house, straightening pictures and ensuring everything was perfect for what he hoped would be a pleasant family evening. The living room showcased his pride in his heritage and his journey. Framed photographs of his graduation from trade school, his certification as a master electrician, his purchase of his first home. On the mantel sat a picture of his late wife, Denise, Marcus's mother, who had died of cancer when Marcus was only 8 years old. The kitchen table was set for 6: Jerome, Marcus, Marcus's girlfriend Brittany, and Marcus's 3 closest friends, all invited to what Marcus had promised would be a real celebration for the old man. Jerome had prepared most of the meal himself, despite Marcus's half-hearted offers to cater the dinner. Cooking gave Jerome peace, and he took pride in the spread he'd prepared: honey-glazed ham, mac and cheese made from his mother's recipe, collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey, cornbread, and sweet potato pie for dessert. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, and Jerome opened it to find Marcus standing on the front porch with Brittany and his 3 friends: Devon, a fellow graphic designer, Malik, who worked in tech, and James, who was between jobs but always seemed to have money for designer clothes and expensive dinners. Marcus looked good, as always. He'd inherited his mother's striking features and his father's height, and he dressed with the kind of careful attention to style that cost far more than his income should have allowed. "Happy birthday, Pops," Marcus said, embracing his father with what felt like genuine warmth. 60 years young, right? "That's right, son," Jerome replied, choosing to focus on the affection in his son's voice rather than the subtle condescension he'd learned to recognize. "Come on in, everyone. Dinner's almost ready." The group settled into the dining room, where Jerome had used his best china and crystal, pieces he'd inherited from his grandmother and rarely brought out except for special occasions. The conversation started pleasantly enough, with Marcus's friends complimenting the house and the meal, and Brittany asking thoughtful questions about Jerome's work as an electrician and his plans for retirement. "Mr. Washington, Marcus told us you own your own electrical contracting business now," Devon said, cutting into his ham. "That's really impressive. Building something from nothing takes real vision." Jerome appreciated the young man's respect. "Started out working for other people for 20 years, saved every penny I could, and finally took the leap 10 years ago. Best decision I ever made. There's something to be said for being your own boss and building something that can last." See, that's what I'm trying to do with my design work," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying a slight edge that Jerome recognized as the beginning of familiar territory. "Building a brand, establishing myself in the creative community. It takes time and investment, but eventually it pays off." Jerome nodded diplomatically, though he'd heard variations of this speech many times before. Marcus had been building his brand for over a decade now, with little to show for it except debt and a portfolio of work for clients who rarely paid on time or in full. The dinner progressed through the usual topics: Oakland's changing neighborhoods, the Raiders' disappointing season, everyone's opinions about the latest political drama. Jerome found himself relaxing as the evening felt more normal than their recent interactions. Perhaps the tension between him and Marcus was finally beginning to ease. That comfort shattered when Marcus stood up to make what he announced was a special toast for my father's milestone birthday. "I want everyone to raise their glasses," Marcus said, his voice carrying the slight slur that Jerome recognized meant he'd been drinking before dinner. "To my father, Jerome Washington, who has always been there to provide for his family." Jerome felt a chill run through him at the emphasis Marcus placed on the word provide, and the sarcastic undertone that suggested the toast was heading somewhere unpleasant. "Dad, you've always been the kind of man who believes in responsibility, in taking care of your obligations, in making sure your family has what they need," Marcus continued, his smile becoming sharper with each word. "So I think it's time we talked about your most important responsibility as you enter your senior years." The room fell uncomfortably quiet as Marcus's friends seemed to sense the shift in tone. Brittany looked confused and concerned, while Jerome felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. "What responsibility is that, son?" Jerome asked carefully. Marcus took a long sip of his wine before answering. "Your responsibility to stop being selfish and start thinking about the people who will have to deal with your legacy. You're sitting in a house worth over $1 million now, thanks to Oakland's real estate boom, and you're holding onto it like you're going to live forever." Jerome felt his jaw clench. "Marcus, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, Dad, I think it's the perfect time," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "We're all here celebrating your 60th birthday, which means you're officially old, and old people have certain obligations to the next generation." "What obligations?" Jerome asked, though he dreaded the answer. Marcus gestured around the dining room with its expensive furnishings and careful decorations. "You're hoarding wealth while your son struggles to build his future. You're sitting on assets that could help me establish my business, buy a proper home, start a family with Brittany. But instead, you're clinging to this house like you think you're going to take it with you when you die." The cruelty in Marcus's words hit Jerome like a physical blow. He looked around the table at Marcus's friends, who were staring at their plates in obvious discomfort, and at Brittany, who looked horrified by her boyfriend's behavior. "Marcus, that's enough," Jerome said quietly, trying to maintain his dignity in front of the guests. But Marcus wasn't finished. The alcohol and years of resentment had loosened his tongue, and he seemed determined to say everything he'd been thinking but holding back. "You know what, Dad? You want to know what the best birthday gift would be? Marcus said, his voice dripping with cruel sarcasm. The best gift would be if you just died already. Then I could finally get what's mine, what I've been waiting for, what you should have given me years ago, instead of making me beg for scraps. The silence that followed was deafening. Jerome felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room, and he could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. In 60 years of life, through poverty, discrimination, the death of his beloved wife and countless other challenges, no one had ever spoken to him with such casual cruelty. And it had come from his own son, the child he had sacrificed everything to raise and protect. Brittany gasped audibly. "Marcus, how could you say something like that?" Devon, Malik, and James looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. The birthday dinner had become a nightmare of family dysfunction that they clearly wished they weren't witnessing. But Jerome felt something beyond hurt or anger settling over him. It was a cold clarity, a sudden understanding that the son he had raised and loved and sacrificed for saw him not as a father deserving respect, but as an obstacle to his inheritance, a burden whose death would be a gift rather than a loss. "I see," Jerome said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "So my death would be a gift to you." Marcus, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, tried to backtrack. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant—" "No," Jerome interrupted, standing up from the table with a dignity that seemed to command the room. "You meant exactly what you said. You see me as an inconvenience standing between you and what you think you deserve." Jerome walked to the kitchen, where he kept important documents in a drawer near the phone. He returned to the dining room carrying a manila folder, which he placed on the table in front of Marcus. "Since my death would be such a gift to you," Jerome said with calm precision, "I thought I should show you exactly what that gift would look like." Marcus looked confused and slightly frightened by his father's controlled reaction. "Dad, what is that?" "That's my will," Jerome replied, "the document that would determine what happens to my assets when I die. Since you're so eager for that day to come, I thought you should see what you're wishing for." Jerome opened the folder and pulled out the legal document, spreading it on the table among the dinner plates and wine glasses. The room remained completely silent as he found the relevant page. "Here it is," Jerome said, pointing to a specific paragraph. "The section that deals with the distribution of my estate. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Marcus's face had gone pale. "Dad, I don't think—" "I leave the entirety of my estate, including my home, my business, my investments and all personal property, to the Oakland Community Foundation to be used for educational scholarships for young people from low-income families," Jerome read clearly. "I make this bequest in honor of my late wife, Denise Washington, who believed that education was the path out of poverty and the key to building strong communities." The silence that followed was even more profound than before. Marcus stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language, his mind clearly struggling to process what he'd just heard. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked weakly. "It means," Jerome said, still maintaining his calm demeanor, "that when I die, whenever that blessed day arrives that you're so looking forward to, you won't inherit a single penny. Not the house, not the business, not the investments, nothing. It all goes to help kids who actually value education and opportunity, rather than sitting around waiting for someone else to hand them success." Marcus's confusion turned to horror as the implications sank in. "But Dad, I'm your son. I'm your only child. You can't just—" "I can do whatever I want with my own money and property," Jerome said firmly. "And what I want is to make sure it goes to people who will appreciate it and use it to build something meaningful, rather than someone who sees my death as a gift." Brittany had tears in her eyes. "Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry, Marcus didn't mean what he said. He's had too much to drink and he's been stressed about money. Oh, he meant it, Jerome said, looking directly at his son. This isn't about alcohol or stress. This is about character, and his character has been on display for years. Tonight, he just finally said what he's been thinking. Marcus seemed to be sobering up rapidly as the reality of the situation hit him. Dad, please. I was angry. I was frustrated. I said something stupid. You can't disown me over one mistake. One mistake? Jerome laughed bitterly. Son, this has been building for years. The constant demands for money, the lack of respect for anything I've worked for, the attitude that you're entitled to my life's work simply because you exist. Tonight wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. Jerome stood up and began clearing the dinner plates, his movements precise and controlled. I think this dinner is over. You all should probably leave. Marcus's friends needed no further encouragement. They gathered their things quickly, mumbling embarrassed apologies as they headed for the door. Brittany lingered for a moment, looking back and forth between father and son with obvious distress. Mr. Washington, she said quietly, I hope you'll reconsider. Marcus loves you, even if he has a terrible way of showing it sometimes. Jerome paused in his clearing and looked at the young woman with genuine sympathy. Brittany, you seem like a good person. You deserve better than someone who would speak about their own father's death as a gift. I hope you remember that. After everyone left, Jerome sat alone in his dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a celebration, but had turned into a funeral for the relationship he'd thought he had with his son. The house felt different now. Not like a home filled with love and memories, but like a museum of wasted hopes and misplaced trust. He looked at the will still spread on the table and felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that Marcus's cruelty had revealed itself before it was too late to do something about it. The document had been drafted 2 years earlier, during the last time Marcus had disappointed him deeply, but he'd never shared its contents with his son before tonight. Now, Marcus knew exactly what his words had cost him, and Jerome felt no regret about the revelation. A man who could wish for his father's death as a birthday gift had forfeited any claim to that father's legacy. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID. Jerome looked at the phone for a long moment, then turned it off and went upstairs to bed. Some conversations weren't worth having, and some relationships weren't worth saving. Tomorrow he would begin the process of making sure his assets went to people who would value them. Tonight he would mourn the son he'd thought he'd raised and accept the reality of the stranger who had taken his place. The following morning brought the kind of crisp October sunshine that made Oakland's hills gleam golden in the early light. But Jerome felt none of the usual pleasure he took in watching the city wake up from his bedroom window. Sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by the echo of Marcus's words and the hollow ache of understanding that his relationship with his only child might be irreparably damaged. Jerome's morning routine, coffee, newspaper, check the weather for his workday ahead, felt mechanical and empty. The dining room still held the ghostly presence of last night's disaster, despite his having cleaned up every trace of the dinner. He'd thrown away the leftover food, packed the good china back into storage, and folded the will neatly back into its folder, but the memory of Marcus's cruel words seemed to permeate the very walls of the house. At 7:30 a.m., his phone began ringing. Marcus's name on the caller ID. Jerome let it go to voicemail. It rang again 10 minutes later. Then again at 8 o'clock. By 9, Marcus had called 6 times and left 3 voicemails that Jerome deleted without listening to. Jerome's sister Denise, named after his late wife and 15 years his senior, called at 9:15 from her home in Sacramento. She'd been the family matriarch since their mother died a decade earlier, and Jerome had always valued her wisdom and direct manner of speaking. "Little brother," she said without preamble, "what happened last night? Marcus just called me crying and carrying on about how you disinherited him and threw him out of the house." Jerome sank into his kitchen chair and told Denise the whole story, from Marcus's increasingly entitled behavior over recent years to the devastating birthday dinner confession. His sister listened without interruption, making only occasional sounds of disapproval as the details unfolded. "Lord have mercy," Denise said when he finished. "That boy actually said your death would be a gift." Those were his exact words. "And you showed him the will you made 2 years ago?" "I did. I figured if he was so eager for me to die, he should know what he'd be getting." Denise was quiet for a long moment. "Jerome, I understand why you're hurt. What that boy said was cruel and heartless, and if one of my children ever spoke to me like that, I'd probably react the same way. But I have to ask, are you sure this is how you want to handle it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you ready to lose your son forever? Because that's what this is heading toward if you don't find some way to work through it." Jerome felt a flash of anger. "He's the one who said he wished I was dead. Why is it my job to fix this?" "Because you're the parent," Denise said simply. "And because you raised him better than what he showed last night. Something's eating at that boy, something deeper than just wanting your money. Children don't wish their parents dead unless they're in serious pain about something. He's 32 years old, Denise. He's not a child anymore." "He'll always be your child, Jerome. The question is whether you want to try to understand what's really going on with him, or whether you want to let pride destroy what's left of your family." After ending the call with his sister, Jerome sat at his kitchen table, wrestling with competing emotions. Part of him wanted to maintain his position. Marcus's words had been unforgivable, and actions had consequences. But another part, the part that remembered teaching a 5-year-old Marcus to ride a bike and cheering at his high school graduation, wondered if Denise was right about deeper issues driving his son's behavior. At 11 a.m., someone knocked on his front door. Jerome looked through the peephole and saw Brittany standing on his porch, looking nervous and determined. He opened the door, curious about what Marcus's girlfriend wanted to say. "Mr. Washington, I'm sorry to bother you," she began, "but I need to talk to you about Marcus. May I come in?" Jerome gestured her into the living room, where she perched nervously on the edge of the sofa. Brittany was 28, a social worker with a master's degree and the kind of practical intelligence that had always made Jerome wonder what she saw in his chronically underachieving son. "Mr. Washington, what Marcus said last night was horrible, and I told him so," she began. "But I think there are things you don't know about why he's been so angry and desperate lately." "Such as?" Brittany took a deep breath. "He's drowning financially. Not just the usual credit card debt. He owes over $60,000 between credit cards, student loans, and money he borrowed from friends. His design business has basically failed, but he's too proud to admit it and get a regular job." Jerome felt a familiar mix of disappointment and concern. Why hasn't he told me any of this? Because he knows you'll lecture him about financial responsibility and tell him to get a real job, Brittany said. "He's ashamed, Mr. Washington. He knows he's messed up, but he doesn't know how to fix it without admitting that all his dreams about being a successful creative entrepreneur were just fantasies. So instead of asking for help dealing with his problems, he decides to wish me dead so he can inherit his way out of debt." Brittany winced. "It's more complicated than that. Marcus has always felt like he could never live up to your expectations. You built this amazing life from nothing. You're a successful businessman. You own a beautiful home. You raised him as a single parent after his mother died. In his mind, you're this perfect example of what a man should be, and he's a failure in comparison. Jerome considered this perspective. I've never told him he was a failure. You didn't have to. He tells himself that every time he looks at what you've accomplished versus where he is at 32. The money problems, the failed businesses, the constant feeling that he's disappointing you, it's eating him alive. That still doesn't excuse what he said last night. No, it doesn't, Brittany agreed. What he said was cruel and wrong, and I told him so. But Mr. Washington, he's been talking about suicide for the past 3 months. He feels trapped, worthless, like everyone would be better off without him. Last night, I think he was projecting his own death wish onto you. This revelation hit Jerome like a physical blow. Suicide? Why didn't anyone tell me this? Because Marcus made me promise not to. He said you already think he's a disappointment, and knowing he was suicidal would just confirm that you failed as a father. Jerome felt the room spinning slightly. The idea that his son was contemplating suicide while Jerome was focused on being angry about inherited property seemed suddenly absurd and horrible. Is he getting help? Therapy? Medication? I've been trying to convince him to see someone, but he says he can't afford it, and his pride won't let him ask you for money for therapy. He's stuck in this cycle where he needs help but can't accept it, and the longer it goes on, the worse he gets. Jerome stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the street where he'd watched Marcus learn to drive, where they'd played catch in the front yard, where his son had grown from a grieving 8-year-old into the troubled man he'd become. What do you want me to do, Brittany? I want you to understand that Marcus doesn't actually want you to die. He's angry and desperate and feeling worthless, and last night he said something unforgivable because he's in more pain than he knows how to handle. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen, but I am asking you to consider that your son needs help more than he needs punishment. After Brittany left, Jerome spent the afternoon calling mental health professionals and researching treatment options. By evening, he had appointments set up with 3 different therapists who specialized in adult children of high-achieving parents and the unique pressures that dynamic could create. At 6 p.m., Marcus called again. This time, Jerome answered. "Dad?" Marcus's voice was hoarse, as if he'd been crying. "Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." "I know what I said last night was unforgivable. I know you have every right to hate me and never speak to me again. But, Dad, I need you to know that I don't actually want you to die. I love you and I'm sorry, and I don't know how to fix what I've broken." Jerome could hear the genuine anguish in his son's voice, and it triggered every protective instinct he'd developed during 32 years of fatherhood. "Marcus, Brittany came to see me today. She told me about the debt, about the business failing, about you thinking about hurting yourself." There was a long silence, then a sound that might have been a sob. "She wasn't supposed to tell you that." "Son, I'm glad she did. Because now I understand that last night wasn't really about wishing me dead. It was about you feeling dead inside and not knowing how to ask for help. I'm such a failure, Dad. Everything you built, everything you accomplished, and I can't even keep a small business running. I'm 32 years old, and I'm more lost than I was at 22. Marcus, listen to me carefully. You are not a failure. You're a young man who took some risks that didn't work out and made some mistakes that got out of hand. That doesn't define your worth as a person or your potential for the future. But the money I owe, the business, the way I've disappointed you, we're going to deal with all of that, Jerome said firmly. Together. But first, you're going to get some professional help for the depression and the thoughts about hurting yourself. I've already found some therapists we can call tomorrow. Dad, I can't afford therapy. You don't need to worry about affording it. That's what fathers are for, helping their children when they're in trouble, even when they're grown up. Marcus was crying openly now. After what I said to you, why would you help me? Because despite what you said last night, and despite how much it hurt me, you're still my son. And I'd rather have a living son who needs help than a dead son who was too proud to ask for it. They talked for another hour, with Marcus gradually opening up about the depths of his financial and emotional struggles. Jerome listened without judgment, asking questions and offering support, while carefully avoiding the lectures and advice-giving that had characterized too many of their recent conversations. "Marcus," Jerome said as they prepared to end the call, "I want you to come over tomorrow evening for dinner, just the two of us. We need to talk about some practical steps for dealing with your situation." "What about the will? Are you really leaving everything to charity?" Jerome considered his answer carefully. "The will I showed you last night was real, and it reflected how I felt after years of watching you take my support for granted. But wills can be changed, son. People can change. Relationships can be repaired. Whether that happens depends on both of us being willing to do the work." "I want to do the work, Dad. I want to be the son you deserve." "You already are the son I deserve," Jerome said. "You're human, which means you're going to make mistakes and hurt people sometimes. The question isn't whether you'll mess up, it's whether you'll take responsibility for your mistakes and learn from them." That night, Jerome sat in his living room looking at family photos and thinking about the complex nature of love between parents and adult children. Marcus's words had been cruel and hurtful, but underneath the cruelty was a young man drowning in shame and feeling unworthy of the love his father had always given him. Tomorrow, they would begin the hard work of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than expectations, support rather than judgment, and understanding rather than disappointment. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since last night's disaster, Jerome felt hopeful that they could find their way back to each other. The will would remain unchanged for now, but Jerome found himself imagining a future where Marcus had worked through his problems and rebuilt his life into something he could be proud of. In that future, there might be room for a different kind of legacy, one based on personal growth rather than inherited wealth, earned trust rather than family obligation. But first, his son needed to learn how to value his own life. Everything else could be figured out later. 3 weeks after the disastrous birthday dinner, Jerome sat in the waiting room of Dr. Sarah Chen's therapy office in downtown Oakland, flipping through a magazine he wasn't really reading while waiting for Marcus's first session to end. This had become his Tuesday routine, driving Marcus to therapy, waiting during the session, then taking him to lunch afterward, where they would have careful, honest conversations about the insights and challenges that emerged from each appointment. The therapy had been a revelation for both of them. Dr. Chen specialized in family dynamics and the particular pressures faced by adult children of successful parents. In just 3 sessions, she had helped Marcus begin to articulate feelings he'd been carrying since childhood. The overwhelming pressure to live up to Jerome's achievements, the shame of financial dependence at his age, and the way his mother's early death had created abandonment fears that made him simultaneously crave and resent his father's support. "Jerome," Dr. Chen's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Could you join us for the last few minutes? Marcus has something he'd like to share with both of us." Jerome followed the therapist into her comfortable office, where Marcus sat on a couch, looking nervous but more composed than he had in months. The young man had lost weight from stress, but his eyes were clearer and he carried himself with less of the defensive anger that had characterized their interactions for the past few years. "Dad," Marcus began, "Doctor, Chen has been helping me understand something important about what happened at your birthday dinner. I want to explain it to you, not to make excuses, but so you can understand where those awful words really came from." Jerome settled into a chair across from his son. "I'm listening." When I said your death would be a gift, I wasn't really talking about you dying. I was talking about my own death wish, but I was too cowardly to say it directly. I've been having thoughts about killing myself for months, feeling like everyone would be better off without me, including you. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. Marcus has been struggling with what we call projection, attributing his own feelings to others as a way of expressing them indirectly. I kept thinking that you must be disappointed in me, that you must wish you'd never had a son who turned out to be such a failure, Marcus continued. So when I said you should die, what I really meant was that I should die, but I couldn't say that out loud because it would hurt you too much. Jerome felt his chest tighten with emotion. Son, I have never, not once, wished I didn't have you. Even when I've been frustrated with your choices, even when we've disagreed about money or direction, you have always been the best thing in my life. I know that intellectually, Marcus said. But emotionally, I've been carrying this story that I'm a burden to you, that your life would be easier if you didn't have to worry about me constantly disappointing you. Dr. Chen addressed Jerome directly. One of the things we've been working on is helping Marcus understand that his perception of disappointing you is largely internal. Can you tell him about your actual feelings regarding his struggles? Jerome thought carefully before responding. Marcus, when you were 8 years old and your mother died, I made a promise to myself that I would do everything in my power to give you opportunities I never had. I worked 2 jobs so you could go to private school. I saved for years so you could go to college without debt. I supported your creative ambitions even when I worried they weren't practical. Marcus nodded, tears forming in his eyes. But somewhere along the way, Jerome continued, I think I gave you the impression that success was the most important thing, that your worth was tied to your achievements. And I think that created pressure that was unfair and unrealistic. It's not your fault, Dad. You were trying to give me the best life possible. Maybe, but intent doesn't always match impact. If my way of showing love made you feel like you had to earn my approval, then I failed as a father in some important ways. Dr. Chen smiled at the exchange. This is exactly the kind of honest communication that can begin to heal old wounds. Jerome, you're taking responsibility for your part in the dynamic without excusing Marcus's behavior. Marcus, you're acknowledging your struggles without blaming Jerome for them. This is real progress. They spent the rest of the session working on practical steps for improving their relationship going forward. Marcus would continue therapy twice a week and was starting a part-time job at a marketing firm while he figured out how to restructure his business debts. Jerome would work on expressing pride in Marcus as a person rather than focusing primarily on achievements, and both would practice having honest conversations about money and expectations before small issues became big resentments. After the session, they went to their usual lunch spot, a Caribbean restaurant in West Oakland, where Jerome had been bringing Marcus since he was a child. Over jerk chicken and rice and beans, they continued the conversation that therapy had started. Dad, I want you to know that I understand why you changed your will, Marcus said between bites. When someone tells you they wish you were dead, it makes perfect sense to decide they don't deserve to inherit from you. Marcus, about the will. No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this a lot. Even if you decide to change it back, I want to earn that decision. I want to prove that I can build a life I'm proud of, that I can contribute to our family instead of just taking from it. Jerome smiled at his son's determination. I appreciate that attitude, but I want you to know that my love for you isn't conditional on you proving anything. You don't have to earn my approval or my support. I know, But I want to earn my own approval. I want to look in the mirror and see someone who's building something meaningful instead of someone who's just waiting for his father to rescue him. Over the following weeks, Jerome watched Marcus begin to transform his life with a dedication that reminded him of the focused young man who had graduated college with honors before losing his way in the uncertainty of early adulthood. Marcus threw himself into the part-time marketing job with an enthusiasm that surprised his new employers, who quickly recognized his talent and offered him additional responsibilities. More importantly, Marcus began having honest conversations with Brittany about their relationship and their future. He admitted to her the full extent of his financial problems and his struggles with depression, and together they developed a realistic plan for addressing both issues. Brittany, relieved to finally have honesty instead of secrets, committed to supporting Marcus through the process of rebuilding his life. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Marcus still had bad days when depression made everything feel impossible, and Jerome still caught himself offering unsolicited advice when he should have been simply listening. But they were learning to navigate their relationship as two adults who cared about each other, rather than as a disappointed father and a perpetually failing son. 6 weeks after that terrible birthday dinner, Jerome made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Marcus and asked him to come over for dinner, not to discuss problems or therapy insights, but simply to spend time together as father and son. "I want to cook for you," Jerome said over the phone. "Your mother's recipe for fried catfish and her cornbread. We haven't had a meal together just for the pleasure of it in years." Marcus arrived that evening carrying a small wrapped gift. "I know your birthday was ruined, but I wanted to give you something that actually reflects how I feel about you." Jerome opened the package to find a framed photograph he'd never seen before, a picture of him teaching a 10-year-old Marcus to use a power drill in the garage. Both of them were smiling, covered in sawdust, and completely absorbed in their shared project. "Brittany found this in my old photos," Marcus explained. "I'd forgotten about that day, but looking at it reminded me of who we really are together. Not the stressed-out people we've become lately, but a father and son who genuinely enjoy each other's company." Jerome studied the photograph, remembering that Saturday afternoon when Marcus had begged to help with a home improvement project. He'd been patient and encouraging, teaching Marcus how to measure twice and cut once, how to respect tools and take pride in craftsmanship. It had been one of many such days that had somehow gotten lost in the years of worry and disappointment. "I remember this," Jerome said softly. "You were so proud when you drilled that hole perfectly straight. You said you wanted to be a builder like your dad." "I still do want to build things," Marcus said. "Not houses necessarily, but something meaningful, something that would make you proud." They spent the evening cooking together, with Marcus following his mother's cornbread recipe while Jerome handled the catfish. The kitchen filled with familiar aromas and comfortable conversation, and for the first time in years, they felt like family again, rather than two people trying to navigate a complicated relationship. "Dad," Marcus said as they sat down to eat, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Go ahead." "Do you think there's any chance you could ever trust me again? Not with money necessarily, but with our relationship? Do you think we can get back to a place where you see me as your son instead of as a problem to be managed?" Jerome considered the question carefully. "Marcus, trust isn't something that gets rebuilt overnight. But I can tell you that sitting here with you tonight, seeing the effort you're putting into therapy and work and taking care of yourself, this feels like the beginning of something better." "I want to make a deal with you," Marcus said. "I want to earn back my place in your will, but not the way I was thinking before. I don't want you to leave me the house or the business. I want you to leave me something that requires me to be worthy of it." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Create a trust or a foundation or something that would require me to demonstrate that I've built a stable, meaningful life before I can access it. Make me prove that I can handle responsibility before giving me any significant inheritance. The idea intrigued Jerome. You're asking me to make you earn something that most people would consider a birthright. I'm asking you to help me become the kind of person who deserves to carry on what you've built. Right now, I'm not that person, but maybe someday I could be. Over the following months, Jerome worked with his attorney to restructure his estate planning in a way that reflected both his love for Marcus and his desire to ensure that any inheritance would be a reward for growth rather than a safety net for continued irresponsibility. The new will established a trust that would provide Marcus with access to funds for education, therapy, and business investments, but only after he met certain benchmarks. Maintaining steady employment for 2 years, completing a financial management course, and demonstrating emotional stability through continued therapy. More importantly, the will established a foundation focused on supporting young people from single-parent households who were pursuing trade careers or starting small businesses. Marcus would eventually serve on the board of this foundation, but only after proving he could manage his own life responsibly. This way, Jerome explained to Marcus when they reviewed the new documents, you're not waiting for me to die to benefit from what I've built. You're being invited to join me in building something that will outlast both of us. Marcus read through the documents with growing excitement and understanding. This isn't just about inheritance, is it? This is about legacy. Exactly. I don't want to leave you money, son. I want to leave you purpose. The foundation became a project they worked on together, with Marcus's design skills proving invaluable in creating materials and outreach programs. For the first time since college, Marcus felt like he was using his talents for something meaningful, and Jerome felt like he was genuinely preparing his son to carry forward the values that had driven his own success. As Christmas approached, Jerome reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the worst night of their relationship. Marcus's cruel words had forced them both to confront painful truths about their dynamic, leading to healing conversations they might never have had otherwise. The crisis had revealed Marcus's depression and suicidal thoughts, getting him help he desperately needed, and it had ultimately brought them to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be family. On Christmas Eve, as they worked together in Jerome's kitchen preparing dinner for Brittany and Denise, Marcus brought up the birthday dinner without prompting. "Dad, I know I can never take back what I said to you that night, but I want you to know that it taught me something important about the power of words. When I wished for your death, I was really wishing for my own death. But hearing those words out loud, seeing how they hurt you, made me realize that I didn't actually want either of us to die. I wanted us both to start living better." Jerome paused in his chopping of vegetables and looked at his son, really looked at him. Marcus had gained back the weight he'd lost to stress. His eyes were bright with purpose rather than dulled by depression, and he carried himself with a confidence that came from doing meaningful work rather than just trying to impress people. "You know what, son? In a strange way, I'm grateful for that night." Marcus looked surprised. "Really? It was the worst thing you've ever said to me, but it was also the most honest. It forced us to stop pretending that everything was fine and start dealing with what was really wrong. Without that crisis, you might never have gotten help for your depression, and I might never have understood how my expectations were affecting you. So you're saying my cruelest moment led to something good? I'm saying that sometimes relationships have to break before they can heal properly. What we have now is stronger than what we had before, because it's based on truth instead of pretense." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with Brittany and Denise, Jerome looked at his small but precious family and felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. The house was warm, with love and laughter, the food was delicious, and the conversations were genuine rather than strained. When Brittany complimented the meal and thanked Jerome for including her in their family tradition, Marcus took her hand and made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Actually, I want this to be even more of a family tradition next year. Brittany and I are engaged." The room erupted in congratulations and excited questions. As Jerome hugged his future daughter-in-law and saw the joy on his son's face, he felt a profound sense of completion. This was what he had worked so hard to build, not just financial security, but a family legacy of love, support, and shared values. Later that evening, after Brittany and Denise had gone home, Marcus helped Jerome clean up the kitchen in comfortable silence. As they finished, Marcus turned to his father with the expression of serious gratitude. "Dad, I want you to know that the man I am tonight, the man who's getting married, who has a good job, who's excited about the foundation work, that man exists because you didn't give up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Son, I could never give up on you. You're the best thing I've ever done with my life. Even after I wished you were dead." Jerome smiled and put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Especially after that. Because that's when I learned that your worst moment doesn't define who you are, how you respond to it does, and your response has been remarkable." As they turned off the lights and prepared to end the evening, Jerome felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond mere happiness. He had raised a son who had lost his way for a while, but found it again through honest self-examination and hard work. Marcus would inherit something far more valuable than money or property. He would inherit the knowledge that he was capable of overcoming his worst impulses and building a life of meaning and purpose. The will had changed again, but this time in a way that reflected growth rather than punishment. Marcus would still have to earn his inheritance, but Jerome no longer doubted that he would. More importantly, the inheritance itself had evolved from a simple transfer of wealth to a shared mission of helping others build better lives. The birthday dinner that had started with a wish for death had ultimately become a celebration of life. Not just the life Jerome had built, but the life Marcus was building, and the life they were building together as a family that had learned to value honesty over harmony and growth over comfort. 1 year after the birthday dinner that nearly destroyed their relationship, Jerome stood in his kitchen, preparing for another milestone celebration. But this time, everything was different. Marcus's 33rd birthday fell on a Saturday in late November, and Jerome had spent the week planning a dinner that would honor not just his son's birthday, but the incredible transformation both of them had undergone in the past 12 months. The guest list was small but meaningful. Marcus and Brittany, who had married in a simple ceremony 3 months earlier. Denise, who had flown in from Sacramento. Dr. Chen, who had become not just Marcus's therapist, but a friend to the whole family. And Robert, Jerome's business partner, who had watched Marcus grow from a troubled young man into someone who was genuinely contributing to their community. Jerome had spent the morning preparing Marcus's favorite meal, not the expensive, complicated dishes his son had favored during his pretentious phase, but the comfort foods of their shared history. His grandmother's mac and cheese, perfectly seasoned fried chicken, fresh cornbread, and collard greens that had been simmering since dawn. The house smelled like family, like tradition, like home in the deepest sense of the word. At 5 p.m., Marcus arrived early to help with the final preparations. He looked like a different person from the angry, desperate man who had sat at this same table a year ago, wishing for his father's death. The weight loss from stress had been replaced by the healthy build of someone who exercised regularly and ate well. His eyes were clear and bright with purpose. Most importantly, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that came from knowing he was building something meaningful with his life. "How can I help, Dad?" Marcus asked, rolling up his sleeves and washing his hands at the kitchen sink. "You can tell me about the Johnson Scholarship application," Jerome replied, handing his son a pile of vegetables to chop. "Did we get the final paperwork submitted?" Marcus smiled as he began dicing onions with the efficiency Jerome had taught him years earlier. The Johnson Scholarship was their foundation's first major initiative, a program that would provide vocational training funding for young people from single-parent households who wanted to pursue careers in the trades. Marcus had spearheaded the application process, working with local high schools and community colleges to identify potential recipients. Not only did we submit it, but we got our first applicant yesterday. Keisha Williams, no relation to us despite the name, is a 17-year-old who wants to become an electrician like her grandfather. Her father died when she was 12, and her mother has been working 2 jobs to support 3 kids. Jerome felt a familiar swell of pride, but it was different from the pride he used to take in Marcus's achievements. This wasn't pride in his son's success, but pride in his son's character, his dedication to helping others, his understanding of the value of hard work, his commitment to building something bigger than himself. "That's exactly the kind of young person we created this foundation to help," Jerome said. "When do we interview her?" "Tuesday after school. I'm really excited about this, Dad. She reminds me of you at that age, determined, hungry for opportunity, willing to work for what she wants." As they continued preparing dinner together, Marcus brought up a topic that had been on both their minds but hadn't been directly addressed. "Dad, I know that technically it's been a year since my breakdown, I guess you could call it. I know we've never formally talked about whether I've met the benchmarks you set in the new will." Jerome paused in his stirring of the greens and looked at his son thoughtfully. The requirements they had established seemed almost quaint now, given how thoroughly Marcus had exceeded them. He had maintained steady employment for over a year, completed not just the required financial management course, but also additional training in non-profit administration and grant writing. His therapy had evolved from crisis intervention to maintenance and personal growth work that he continued because he valued it, not because it was required. "Marcus, to be honest, you met those benchmarks months ago. The question isn't whether you qualify for the inheritance we discussed. The question is whether that inheritance still makes sense for who you've become." Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the man standing in my kitchen right now isn't someone who needs to inherit my legacy. He's someone who's building his own legacy alongside mine. The foundation isn't something I'm leaving to you anymore. It's something we're building together." Before Marcus could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of their guests. But Jerome could see in his son's eyes that the conversation would continue later, and that it would be important. Dinner was everything Jerome had hoped it would be. The food was delicious, the conversation was warm and genuine, and the sense of family around the table was stronger than anything Jerome had felt since his wife's death. Dr. Chen shared stories about the progress she'd witnessed in their family therapy work. Denise told embarrassing childhood stories about both Jerome and Marcus that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. Robert discussed the expansion plans for Jerome's electrical contracting business and the role the foundation would play in training the next generation of skilled workers. But the most meaningful moment came when Brittany asked Marcus to tell everyone about his new job opportunity. "Well," Marcus said, suddenly shy in the way he got when he was genuinely excited about something, "the marketing firm I've been working with offered me a partnership track position. It's a big step up in responsibility and salary, but more importantly, it would let me focus on non-profit and social impact clients. "That's wonderful, son," Jerome said. "But I can tell there's more to the story." Marcus exchanged a look with Brittany, who nodded encouragingly. "The thing is, taking this position would mean really committing to this career path. It would mean accepting that I'm not going to be the creative entrepreneur I always thought I wanted to be. It would mean building a more conventional but stable life." "And how do you feel about that?" Dr. Chen asked with the gentle curiosity that had helped Marcus work through so many difficult realizations over the past year. "Honestly, relieved. I spent so many years trying to be something I thought would impress people, especially Dad, that I never stopped to think about what would actually make me happy. This work, helping organizations that do good in the world, building something sustainable with Brittany, this feels right. In a way, nothing else ever has." Jerome felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened to his son's words. This was the conversation he had dreamed of having for years, not Marcus asking for money or making excuses for failure, but Marcus talking about building a meaningful life based on his own values and genuine interests. "Marcus," Jerome said carefully, "I want you to know that I am prouder of you right now than I have ever been. Not because of the job opportunity, though that's wonderful, but because of the man you've become. Even though I'm not going to be a successful business owner like you, especially because you're not going to be a business owner like me. You're going to be something better. You're going to be Marcus Williams, a man who knows who he is and what he wants to build with his life." After dinner, while their guests helped clean up and enjoyed coffee and birthday cake in the living room, Jerome asked Marcus to step out onto the back porch for a private conversation. The November evening was crisp and clear, with stars visible despite the city lights, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke from neighboring fireplaces. "Son, I want to talk to you about the will again, but not in the way you're expecting." Marcus prepared himself for another discussion about benchmarks and requirements, but Jerome had something entirely different in mind. "I've been thinking about what legacy really means," Jerome continued. "For years, I thought it meant leaving you money and property so you'd be financially secure. Then, after our crisis last year, I thought it meant making you earn the right to inherit what I'd built. But watching you this past year, I've realized that both of those approaches were wrong." "What do you mean?" Jerome chose his words carefully, knowing this conversation would shape their relationship for the rest of their lives. "Legacy isn't about transferring wealth from one generation to the next. It's about transferring values, work ethic, and purpose. And son, you already have those things. You don't need to inherit them from me because you've developed them yourself." Marcus was quiet, absorbing his father's words. "I'm changing the will again," Jerome said. "But this time I'm not adding requirements or benchmarks. I'm recognizing that you've already become the man I hoped you would be, and that man doesn't need his father's money to build a meaningful life." "Dad, are you saying—" "I'm saying that the foundation will continue to be our shared project for as long as we're both alive to work on it. When I die, you'll inherit enough to be comfortable, but not enough to stop working or pursuing your own goals. The majority of my assets will go to the foundation, where they'll do the most good for the most people." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Jerome wondered if his son would be disappointed by this decision. "Dad," Marcus said finally, "that's the best inheritance you could possibly give me." "Really? Really? I don't want to be the kind of person who's just waiting for his father to die so he can inherit a fortune. I want to be the kind of person who builds his own fortune, his own reputation, his own legacy. What you're giving me is the freedom to do that without the pressure of living up to someone else's achievements." They stood together in comfortable silence, father and son, who had found their way back to each other through the hardest year of their relationship. "Marcus, I want to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. The night you wished me dead, that was the best thing that ever happened to our relationship," Marcus looked startled. How can you say that? Because it forced us to stop pretending and start being honest with each other. It led to you getting help for your depression. It led to us understanding each other better. It led to all of this, the foundation, your new career, your marriage, your genuine happiness. None of that would have happened if we'd kept going the way we were. So you're saying my worst moment led to our best moments? I'm saying that sometimes families have to break completely before they can heal properly. What we have now is stronger than what we had before because it's based on truth and mutual respect rather than obligation and expectation. As they prepared to rejoin their guests, Marcus stopped his father with a hand on his arm. Dad, I want you to know that I understand now what you were trying to teach me all those years. It wasn't about money or success or impressing people. It was about taking responsibility for your own life and building something meaningful with the opportunities you're given. That's exactly right, son. And I want you to know that when I have children someday, I'm going to try to teach them the same thing, not by handing them everything they want, but by showing them how to work for what they need and find purpose in helping others. Jerome felt a profound sense of completion as he listened to his son's words. This was what he had been working toward for 33 years, not creating a successful business or accumulating wealth, but raising a man who understood the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the responsibility to help others who were struggling. Back inside, the birthday celebration continued with stories and laughter that lasted well into the evening. But for Jerome, the real celebration was the quiet conversation he'd just had with his son, a conversation that proved beyond doubt that Marcus had grown into exactly the kind of man Jerome had always hoped he would become. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Marcus stood up to make a toast, something Jerome hadn't seen him do since that terrible night a year earlier. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, but especially my father, Marcus said, raising his glass. A year ago, I said something cruel and unforgivable to this man. I told him his death would be a gift. Tonight, I want to say something different. The room grew quiet as Marcus gathered his thoughts. Dad, your life has been a gift. Not just to me, but to everyone you've helped along the way, everyone you've employed, everyone you've mentored, and everyone who will benefit from the foundation we're building together. You've shown me that success isn't about what you accumulate, but about what you contribute, and the greatest gift you've given me isn't your money or your property. It's the example of what it means to be a good man. Jerome felt tears running down his cheeks as he listened to his son's words. Around the table, everyone else was similarly moved by the transformation they had witnessed over the past year. So here's to Jerome Washington, Marcus concluded, the best father, the best role model, and the best partner in making the world a little bit better that anyone could ask for. As everyone raised their glasses and echoed Marcus's toast, Jerome felt a peace and satisfaction that went beyond mere happiness. He had faced the worst crisis of his relationship with his son and emerged with something stronger and more meaningful than what they'd had before. Marcus would inherit something far more valuable than money. He would inherit the knowledge that he was capable of overcoming his worst impulses and building a life of purpose and meaning. The birthday dinner that had started with a wish for death had ultimately become a celebration of life, not just the life Jerome had built, but the life Marcus was building, and the life they were building together as a family that had learned to value growth over comfort, truth over harmony, and service over selfishness. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Jerome sat in his living room looking at the framed photograph Marcus had given him the previous Christmas, the picture of them working together in the garage when Marcus was 10 years old. Both father and son had traveled a long way from that innocent afternoon, through pain and misunderstanding, and back to love and respect. On the table beside the photograph sat a new will, signed just that afternoon, that reflected not punishment or requirements, but profound trust in the man Marcus had become. It was a document that said, in legal language, what Jerome had tried to say in conversation. I believe in you, I'm proud of you, and I trust you to carry forward the values we've built together. The greatest inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the knowledge that family could survive its worst moments and emerge stronger, that love could endure even cruel words, and that redemption was always possible for those willing to do the hard work of changing themselves. Jerome Washington had learned that being a father meant not just providing for your child, but believing in their capacity to grow beyond their mistakes. And Marcus Williams had learned that being a son meant not just receiving your father's love, but earning your own respect through honest self-examination and dedicated effort to become the person you were capable of being. The will had changed 3 times in 18 months, each version reflecting a different understanding of what it meant to leave a legacy. The final version was perfect, not because it was generous or restrictive, but because it was based on a relationship that had been tested by crisis and strengthened by truth. As Jerome prepared for bed that night, he felt grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought them to this point, even the painful moments, especially the painful moments, because those were the moments that had taught them both what it truly meant to be family.